Hi, we're coming to you from Battlefield Vegas in Las Vegas, Nevada at SHOT Show 2018. My name's Kyle Sweet. I'm the General Counsel for CCW Safe, joined tonight by Larry Vickers, Alan B. West, and Don West. And we're going to be talking, fielding questions that people are submitting via Facebook and just kind of having a conversation on the state of the gun industry, things we've seen at SHOT Show that have piqued our interest. Get some insight into these subject matter experts from the various and distinct lanes that they occupy in the world and culture of their interest to people who like firearms. So just a quick introduction. Larry, why don't you kind of give yourself a quick introduction? And
Larry Vickers, retired U.S. Special Operations, retired out of a Tier 1 U.S. Army unit with 21 years in. Retired in 2003. Since then, I've been doing Vickers Tactical, which has been a wide variety of projects such as this and firearms-related accessories, training, other stuff like that, all industry-related.
All right, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Colonel West, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Alan West, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, went to the University of Tennessee. We finally got a good football coach. We stole him from Alabama, which does cause some consternation, but that's okay. Spent 22 years in the United States Army as a commissioned artillery officer. Also spent a time up there on Capitol Hill. One term at United States Congressman representing out of Florida. Now I'm on the board of directors for the National Rifle Association, and I think that we are facing some incredible challenges when we look at our Second Amendment right, and will we continue to have a SHOT Show, 10, 15, or 20 years from now if we don't have legislative victories on Capitol Hill?
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being here, Colonel West, and the unique insight you bring that kind of bridges the legislative impact on all of our, people, firearm culture. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of questions for you about helping us understand kind of the dynamics of how the sausage is made, so to speak. And your kind of thoughts and critiques on what's going on now. Mm-hmm. Give us your take. And last but certainly not least is our good friend Don West. Don is National Trial Counsel for CCW Safe. And why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself, Don?
Sure. I have been practicing law for, I guess it's 36 years or so now, largely in Florida, state and federal court, board certified as a criminal trial lawyer. A lot of my practice over the years has involved self-defense cases. In the last few years, I've been associated with CCW Safe as National Trial Counsel. I'm actively involved in the cases that our members may be involved with from the earliest stages of that somewhat frantic call sometimes. Sometimes it's from a police station wondering what to do next. We get counsel, we get investigators, we get experts on board and defend our members. And I like to play an active role in that as consultant with local counsel and actively participate in the process.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Don. And my name is Kyle Sweet, General Counsel of CCW Safe. I started out as a police officer for 4 years, worked various, traffic, patrol, narcotics, low man on the totem pole. So, and loved it and went to law school, and I've been practicing law for 20 years around the country in kind of high-end civil cases, medical negligence cases, things of that nature. So I defend doctors, hospitals all over. And several years ago, my stepbrother, Mike Darter, and I teamed up with another fellow police officer, buddy, Stan Campbell, and formed CCW Safe. And so we're very proud to be able to have these subject matter experts here with us tonight. And we have a studio audience as well, and we're going to entertain questions from everybody. First of all, I wanted to yield the floor to Larry Vickers, who has a really important announcement that we think will wind up yielding really significant benefits for firearms enthusiasts and as well as the greater firearms community as we seek to raise the stature and more effectively communicate why our interest in firearms is, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not only part of our culture, part of our heritage, it's part of our constitutional rights that are guaranteed. So, Larry, why don't you kind of make the big announcement that we've all been kind of excited to bring?
This is something that we've been kicking around for a while. I have a lot of input from a lot of different areas. Myself and Ken Hackathorn, who's basically been my mentor for decades now, really kind of brainstormed an idea to put together an association on a national level. It's now called Firearms Trainers Association. And the theory behind it is we're going to kind of offer a package of services to firearms instructors throughout the country that's never been done before. What you see now is a variety of people, including the NRA, they provide firearms, instructor insurance, but they don't go the extra step. There's holes and gaps in the insurance. We want to have coverage across the board for them. We want to also add stuff to bring stuff to the table that instructors might struggle to get, like a downloadable waiver that they could pull off our website and hand out to their students. Also video references and resources online, so they can go into a classroom and they can get somebody like me or Ken Hackathorn or some of the other board members. We have Jeff Gonzalez on board, and also Dave Spalding, and then Scott Reedy. Those guys are all the founding members, such as me and Ken. The theory behind it is they can get online, they can get a video downloaded, they can see what one of us thinks about firearm safety or pointers to point them in the right direction. And the theory behind it is not only to offer services that have never been offered before, but kind of start pushing that thing down the road. Because like my buddy Ken Hackathorn has said, this has been tried before, it's never been successful for a variety of reasons, but it's like herding cats. You got everybody and their brother teaching a variety of things, firearms related wise. We kind of need to get everybody on the same page if we would. And I'll tell you, for not the least of which, and I know the Colonel would agree with, is we set ourselves up for failure from a legislative point of view and media point of view if you have instructors, say, somewhere in the country, and they're teaching stuff that makes no sense, and all of a sudden now that's turned around against us. That's a matter of time before that goes nuclear. So we want to kind of give everybody the same resources, everybody's on the same playing field, and we can bring things to the table that frankly have never been done before, and at a very reasonable price. So it's something we're looking to kick off very, very soon. Once again, Firearms Trainers Association. We'll have a website up real soon. And then, like I said, myself, Ken Hackathorn, Jeff Gonzalez, Dave Spalding, and Scott Reedy are the founders of board. And then we're going to drive on, and we're hoping this thing will really take off.
Well, and we are too, as people who are involved in the firearms industry, having an organization that can establish standards, that can be utilized nationally, is something that hasn't been done in the firearms industry. And I really think we in the firearms industry have done a poor job effectively communicating our interest and advocating for it in a non-overly aggressive, off-putting way to people who don't feel as strongly about it as we do. And taking a page from the hunting world, I was recently listening to a podcast by a guy named Stephen Ranella on the Meat Eater podcast, and he was interviewing a PhD candidate from Stanford on political communication. And they did a lot of surveys of people who are not, share no affinity for hunting. And so they were trying to do, how can we better communicate to them in a way that they would support this issue like we do? And they tried things like, it's our heritage. Miserable failure. People don't care if it's your heritage or not. You're part of your culture is guns. They don't care. So they tried things like, hunting is something that I used to do with my grandfather, so that doesn't mean anything to them. But when they said things like, particularly to younger people, I like to hunt because I have a more authentic relationship with my food. It's exercise. I want meat that has no antibiotics, has not been, a drain on our, environment. Then people start saying, hey, I respect that. You kind of tap into that. So if we have to look at ways of changing our communication, what have you seen, Colonel West, on firearms issues? They seem to be like incredibly emotional to people who are not interested in guns, and it seems like we're just shouting at one another instead of exploring ways to better communicate. What is your take?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. When you think about here we are in Las Vegas and what recently happened here, you always find the firearms industry and gun rights advocates being on defense. And you have to be proactive. You can't, this is a great opportunity when you have something like a SHOT Show or NRA convention or whatever to get your message out there and be proactive in that message. Because what you don't want to see happen is that you can be so easily demonized. I mean, right now we see a lot of people dealing with what just recently happened at the high school in Kentucky. And so instead of having people that deal with these situations as the situation is, lots of time the anti-gun advocates, like a Michael Bloomberg, they will take that and try to exacerbate it out and show that there's a greater problem when the real problem may be a mental health issue, when the real problem may be better security at schools, but instead they want to, broaden it out. And I think the big thing that we have to ask in the United States of America, understanding our history, is the Second Amendment a right or not? Because if you go back and you understand, and I told some people the original SHOT Show was in April of 1775. That's when the British were going into Concord, and what were the British going to do? They were going to confiscate guns and to destroy a weapons and armament and powder factory. This country got started. This country took on the greatest power that the world knew at the time because we wanted to exercise our right to defend ourselves, our Second Amendment right. And so when you look at the fact that we have a bill such as national reciprocity, I mean, how is it that we are begging to be able to have a Second Amendment right when it's part of the Constitution? And from a legal perspective, where I find this so very conflicted, is that when the Supreme Court heard the Obergefell versus Hodges case, the Supreme Court, 5 people all of a sudden decided that based upon the 14th Amendment, equal protection under law, same-sex marriage was going to be the law of the land. Now, first of all, Supreme Court under Article 3 of the Constitution can't create a right. The second thing, the Supreme Court can't make a law. They're supposed to interpret law. So how is it that the Supreme Court can stand up and say, we're making this thing a law all across the land, but yet the Second Amendment is not a law all across the land?
And that's a great point, because when you drive across state lines, would you ever drive into Louisiana?
No, I don't get stopped at the border.
Right, and say, would you have, no, I think that's one of the things that we could maybe make this issue better to communicate to people who don't share, our enthusiasm for their Second Amendment rights, but they certainly do for their First. And they would never accept our country, where if by traveling into another state, you say, hey,
you lose your rights.
You would never tell your kids, hey, kids, you can't say certain things in Louisiana because you don't have your constitutional protections don't exist there like they do in Texas or wherever. So, when you're when you served in Congress, with the role that you play in different organizations and in policy issues, what is the pressure that comes at you from the left or the right on issues related?
Well, sure. It's emotion based, and as I tell people, you cannot govern based upon emotions. You can be ruled based upon someone's emotions, and we have to be able to take that away. We are either a nation of laws or we're not. Right. We're either going to abide by the Constitution or we're not. And so when I find it so perplexing that we're having arguments about things that are in the Constitution that people are trying to infringe upon and take away. You look at what is happening in California, where they're going after ammunition. You look at Seattle, the city council that passed a law saying that there would be a gun violence tax, and they would charge people for every single piece of ammunition. When you look at this illegal immigration issue that we're facing right now, it is if you sit back and look at it, most of these sanctuary cities and sanctuary states are your biggest anti-gun states and cities. I mean, look at Chicago, look at California, whatever. So there's an incredible correlation that's an opportunity for us to get ahead of this issue and talk about. And again, when you talk about national reciprocity, it has passed through the House. You only need 218 votes in the House. You just have a majority. But now it has to go over to the Senate, and the Senate has this rule based upon a filibuster of 60 votes. Well, the Republicans only have 51 people in the Senate. So guess what? If you want to have national reciprocity pass through the Senate, you got to get 9 folks from the other side. Right now, you have a party, the Democrat Party, that's owned by the far left. And when you look at someone like Michael Bloomberg, who's put in $25 million in his Every Time USA, when you look at the ACLU, who's put $10 million, all to undermine and take away the Second Amendment of the United States of America. And I wrap it up, and I'm sure Larry will agree, an armed individual is a citizen. an unarmed individual is the subject.
Yes, sir.
That's the big difference.
That's a great point. And talking about the emotional aspect, Don, as many people are aware, was co-counsel in the George Zimmerman state of Florida versus George Zimmerman case, which to this point has been the most heated, publicly inflaming self-defense case. People talk about it as a Second Amendment case, but it's really not. And when you boil it down to, the Second Amendment is there because of the inherent right of self-defense. And Don, talk about some of the struggles. We all have we think we know about the George Zimmerman case until we realize there was a George Zimmerman case that actually was occurring inside the courtroom. It wasn't just what was going on outside. How did you deal with the emotional aspect of the gun issue within the context of your representation of your client?
Well, you're exactly right. There were two cases. There was the one you watched on television or you read about, and a lot of that depended on which channel you were watching. And then there was the one that took place in the courtroom that we hope was driven more by evidence. But we knew that everyone that came into the courtroom came into that courtroom having been exposed to some aspect of the case. So perhaps the most critical aspect, I think, of the trial was the jury selection, where you're trying to get behind those attitudes and trying to get someone. And we had a across-the-board spectrum of people, some with no firearms experience or knowledge, some that were so frightened that they couldn't possibly sit on a case that involved a firearm, and others that were almost militant in their views. And of course, what we wound up with was somewhere in the middle, because in jury selection, you don't select the jurors you want. You get rid of the ones you don't, and then you wind up with,
it's jury
who's
elimination.
left.
Yeah, it's elimination.
But we did battle the media constantly because of what we viewed as the misinformation. And I don't know, to your point, how did we do it? I think we were fortunate enough that we wound up with a jury of conscientious individuals that believed in the rule of law, that applied the facts as they knew them to be when they finally heard the evidence to the law of self-defense, and absolutely issued the proper verdict.
And that's, I think, one thing we can, kind of the connective tissue amongst all of our experiences in areas that we may possess some expertise is effectively communicating something to others. I mean, Larry, you do it every day as a trainer. One of the things that seems to get a lot of attention, and depending on what, like Don said, what news channel you're watching, is like the issue of open carry. It's either, the guy at Starbucks with an AR-15 slung over his shoulder. Of course, they're controlling the message. They're inflaming that. What do you think? We're getting some questions that have come in about the concept of open carry from legislative perspective with Colonel West, from training perspective with you, Larry, and we'll talk a little bit about the legal issues surrounding it. What do you think of like the concept of open carry?
When you go to someplace like Arizona, for instance, like I do classes in Arizona pretty much every year, open carry is very common out there. And they're so used to it now that you'll see somebody come into a fast food restaurant or whatever, and nobody even looks twice at them. Conversely, you go to California, and it would be obviously a complete meltdown. My call, it's like everything else in life, you got to apply common sense. It is completely different scenario for you to go in, open carry, say like somewhere in Arizona, to a fast food restaurant, and you've got a Glock on your hip or whatever. Now you roll in with an AR or an AK. Come on now. You're not really applying common sense. And what is the message?
Just because you can doesn't mean
exactly.
You should.
You should. Thank you. And now what you're going to do, and this is a point I want to make. You're going to take somebody who might be on the fence about it, or even who's like, well, my dad shot guns, but I don't know. And now some of those people are going to be turned into enemies. They're going to be much more likely to go, well, I remember that time that guy came in with all the tattoos and the beard and everything. And he had that real scary looking rifle, and that, I had to leave with my kids. And any time that you do that, you run the risk of making enemies. And that's something we don't want to do in this line of work. We don't want to do things that make enemies unnecessarily.
Well, from a tactical standpoint, Larry, what are some issues, pro, con, or whatever, with the idea of open carry?
I think any time you can conceal it, you're better off. I really do. I mean, let's face it, it's like walking in with a neon sign, like having a hat on that glows. I mean, if there was anybody in there with ill intent, I mean, you're showing your hand. It's like walking into a poker game and you've got your cards out. Anytime you can conceal it, I really think that's a far better option.
Colonel West, what are your thoughts on open carry and how you've seen it evolve and be used as a polarizing issue?
Well, as Larry said, I mean, some people call that constitutional carry. That's something, an inherent right. But the thing that we have to realize, again, in this country, with all of these rights and liberties that we do possess, there's a level of responsibility that comes with that. I mean, like you say, the common sense test. And I have always believed, don't give your opposition ammunition to attack you with. And so don't set yourself up for failure. You always want to show yourself as being responsible. You always want to show yourself as being a person that is not abusing an incredible right that you do have. So I think it's very important, it's inherent upon us as the gun owners in the United States of America to not just think about, hey, I can go out and do it, but what is the message that I'm sending? What is the perception that people are going to get? And you just said, how do we win people over to our side? Because we are on the right side. But you have to also take into calculation this whole thing about the emotions that are out there. You know, case in point, what happened in Sutherland Springs? And you're right, it depends on what news channel you're looking at. I mean, it could be Armageddon or it can be, let's get the facts. What happened in Sutherland Springs, if the government had done their job, if the Air Force had turned in the fact that this was a person that had a domestic abuse offense, that had other than honorable, I think a dishonorable discharge, which on your form was
4473.
You're asked those questions, and the red flag should have come up. And as soon as that came out, guess what? No one on the other side talked about it anymore. So you have the facts on our side. And then, of course, you had a firearms instructor that took the guy down. And so if we do all the right things and not abuse it, and we put out that positive, perception, and not, like you said, Larry, have the neon hat that says, I'm a real stupid person because, I think I'm tough walking around with this. No, you're not. Some of the toughest people I've ever seen are the most quiet, easygoing people that you could ever know. And so I think that's what we have to do. What was that line from the movie Gladiator? Win the crowd.
That's a great point. Don, from your experience trying these types of cases, and one thing people can know is Don manages all the claims on the criminal side of the house. And so what are your kind of takeaways and thoughts about dealing with the concept of open carry from a legal perspective?
Well, in the courtroom, the measure is going to be reasonableness. Did you act reasonably? And that standard is going to be the one that the jury decides for themselves, because if you acted reasonably in their mind, then they have the power to acquit you, saying that under the same circumstances, knowing what you knew, under the same facts that you knew at the time, did you act reasonably? And if they think you did, then you'll be acquitted. If they think you were unreasonable, if you were looking for a fight, if you were maybe the braggadocio stuff, I'm not the calmest guy in the room carrying concealed, I'm the big mouth, I'm the guy that wants all the attention drawn to me, they'll look at it very differently. And I think from the broader scope of answering the calls and seeing some of the claims that CCW Safe members far and away are responsible gun owners, and that we get far more requests for coverage, or at least to monitor a situation, that don't get charged ultimately than those that do. But you cannot control when you're going to get charged and when you aren't. The same situation from one state to the next could very well result in a criminal charge in one place, not in another, or maybe across a county line, or just because of the circumstances of the moment. That's when we go to work.
Yeah. One thing we have had a friendship with a great company called Legal Heat, and I travel amongst various states, and I never go without checking Legal Heat. It's an app you can get. They additionally have training services that network of trainers, and it is constantly updated information about the gun laws of wherever you are and wherever you're going, and because you got to go through places to get to your destination, and it is our obligation as gun owners who are going to carry in any way to know the gun laws of everywhere you're traveling through. And so we always recommend people get that app, get a formal relationship with Legal Heat so you can have that information, because we have occasionally had claims where people were carrying in an area that was restricted, and they said, well, I asked a police officer friend of mine and he said it was okay. And the prosecutor does not care about what legal advice your police officer friend gave you. But Legal Heat is a great resource, and so that's something that can really, we always tell people, be your own risk manager. And part of that is, you're carrying a gun for a reason. You want to protect yourself, and so, don't wear your shoot me first, tactical vest that obviously identifies yourself as a gun enthusiast. You're going to be the first person, taken out if there's an incident. What are some of the trends you've seen, Don, in prosecutors' decisions to go after somebody who's carrying concealed and may feel the need to use their weapon? What are you seeing claim-wise that's gotten your interest?
Well, sir, I think the first level of clearance, if you will, is law enforcement's perspective on it. When they arrive at the scene, who calls the police? Is it the guy who pulled the gun or the guy who had the gun pulled on him? And they take a look at the case from that perspective. Are there independent witnesses? What was the attitude, the demeanor of the person? And the law enforcement will typically make a call on the spot whether this is a case that should result in an arrest, one where they will let the dust settle a bit and refer the case for prosecution. I think the cases that are the most likely to result in a prosecution when there were no injuries or no shots fired are these brandishing cases. This notion that you display a weapon in a rude or threatening way, not in self-defense. If you do that in self-defense when you had the right to defend yourself against an imminent threat, that's what the law provides. However, if you do it to win an argument or some nonsense as that, then in most jurisdictions, you'll go to jail.
That's interesting. Once you say judgment, and you derive judgment from training.
Well, that's why I was so excited to hear what Larry was talking about the Firearm Trainers Association. In my lane in the courtroom, when I'm representing somebody who has been involved in a self-defense incident, that person's training is part of this case. And
good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly, or lack of training, more likely. Right. But now we have an opportunity to look at not just the training of the individual who's been involved in the incident, but then the training of the trainers. Are there some standards? Is there a measure here, some benchmarks that we can present to this jury to understand that use of force was reasonable? It was within the framework of an appropriate response to a threat. And that's really good stuff.
Well, what do you think about? Colonel West mentioned that just because you can doesn't mean you should. The things you're talking about of perception that people generally perceive concealed carriers. I mean, what do you think the general perception when someone conjures up an idea of someone who carries concealed? What is the image that's popping into their mind?
I'll be very honest. An old white guy with tattoos or whatever, or something like that. That's the image that's being put out there. And what we have to come to understand is that there's this thing called identity politics, and you have to be able to undermine identity politics. So many people don't know who Otis McDonald was. Otis McDonald was the person that brought the case against the city of Chicago so that he could be able to defend himself in his home. He was an elderly black man that just wanted a shotgun. He just passed 3 years ago. But most people in the United States of America don't know who Otis McDonald was. This was the guy that challenged the gun ban in the city of Chicago. You talk to people in Chicago, they are living as hostages.
Yes, they are.
To the criminal element and to the gangs or whatever. That's part of that perception that we need to get out there to confront. Shaneen Allen, a single black mother of 2 boys, who in New Jersey, she had a legal gun ownership in Philadelphia, drove across the bridge into New Jersey, got stopped on a traffic violation, told the police officer that she had a concealed weapon, and they were going to arrest her, charge her with felony crime, and take away her kids. And until, you know, we got her face out there, until we talked about her case, I mean, it took 6 months, finally, for Governor Chris Christie to pardon her. So I think that those are the type of things we have to get folks to know. The fastest rising group of gun owners in the United States of America are women.
Right. As they are.
You know, we saw that at the one thing that kind of I took of note being on the floor yesterday and today at the SHOT Show was, you know, 2 years ago you didn't see any you know, holster makers or anything identifying women as a target demographic. Now I saw just today 2 or 3 different people who are marketing specific concealed carry products just to women. They're companies, they don't make products for men, it's just for women. And we're seeing it all the time. Our members, you know, women I think have a natural instinct to be more understated, you know, to be less aggressive, and I think they're wonderful communicators.
Well, I don't know about your wife. I mean, my wife's Jamaican. She's kind of aggressive, okay? I'll put that out there. But don't we need more women?
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah,
I mean,
instructors.
I'll bring that up. I see women on occasion. Sometimes it's women coming on their own. A lot of times it's with their boyfriends or their husbands. A couple things about that. They always, from what I've seen, they always take the class serious. Because it's a woman can easily understand, hey, I could be in a situation where I have to use this firearm to protect myself or my family. That's not a stretch. You run into some guys, frankly, they show up, and I mean, to them it's golf with guns, or they just want to be there to say, hey, I took a class with Larry Vickers. Generally, when a woman's there, her attitude is such, this is not a stretch. There may be a day when I have got to use this thing, and it's life or death. So they generally, from that point of view, mentally, they're there to learn, and they're taking it serious. So I'm 100% behind that, 100%.
Yeah, that's, I think, important to shine light on what you're talking about, the individuals who've had to use a gun in self-defense. It's not, you know, the crazy-eyed nut job who is perceived by certain aspects of the media. We're the first company that's actually provided a defense for someone from the point of you know, arrest till the point of acquittal of a first-degree murder charge. And it was in rural North Carolina, and his name's Stephen Maddox, and he's an African-American computer programmer. Has an education, he is a family man, he is a wonderful human being, and he was exercising his right to defend himself and had to shoot an attacker off of him after being attacked 3 times in one night in a sequence of events. We've had numerous, you know, video footage of Stephen wanting to tell his story and talk about it. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage to tell one's story in the current political climate that we have. And I think your point about the people who have had the courage to come out and tell their story, we need more of that. Since we got 2 heavy hitters on the, you know, who spent their life in the big army and different units, and then also in the special operations world, what do you think about the M4? We get people have been talking about that on the SHOT Show. There seems to never be any traction. I know Larry's got a certain take on this, but I'd be interested to get yours as well, Colonel West. What is your take on the replacing of the M4? And let us know why that is something that may or may never happen, and kind of what your take is on the weapon you carried in combat.
Well, I will tell you that I am absolutely appalled at the Department of Defense and the Pentagon. One of the things, there is fraud, waste, and abuse over there. And how long did it take the Army to figure out what their next sidearm would be to replace the 9mm? That could have been done in a weekend, not over 2 years and millions of dollars spent over that. When I look at the M4 right now and I look at the areas in which we're deploying, there are 2 things. We need to have a weapon that has a lot less of little functional pieces where you can keep it a lot cleaner. You don't have to run the risk of it jamming and things of this nature. Then the other thing is we need to have a weapon that when you fire that bullet, it's going to drop the bad guy. And I think that's the big problem we see with the 5.56. So I think it's very important that we move to a personal weapon for the soldier, sailor, airman, marine that's deployed, that when they pull that trigger, they can drop the bad guy. One of the things that we saw, you know, in southern Afghanistan when I was there is these guys are all hopped up on, you know, the opium or whatever, and, you know, you can pop them, and they just still keep coming. We saw the exact same thing in the Korean War with the Chinese who were hopped up on the opium. They had those big, thick uniforms. So I think it's very important we do this, but I don't want to see the military and the Pentagon spend 3 or 4 years when all we got to do, you got some great experts in the firearms industry. take a weekend and figure it out, lay them out, and come up with something, and then get it out to folks. You have commercial off-the-shelf, weapon systems that are out there that we can quickly get to our men and women in uniform. And so that's what I want to see happen. But we need to have a more lethal weapon that is out there, because from what I understand, a lot of special operators, they like the M14 or something that is a little bit heavier.
Well, what you're seeing too is you're seeing a move in certain areas of SOCOM to try to get a 6mm fielded, which of course bridges the gap between 5.56 and 7.62 NATO. Way overdue. Like what you're talking about, Colonel, is, we've been fighting in a desert environment for many years now, and really the 5.56 M4 carbine is a 200-meter gun. Yeah, I can hit somebody 3 or 4, but it is most effective arm's length to 200 meters. Problem is, in the desert, you can see somebody a mile away. And they have of course, the famous overused term, but weapons overmatch.
But what is it? I've been told.
The theory behind it is that the enemy has weapons that they can reach you with that you can't reach them. And there's a little misnomer there. A standard AK, and that doesn't apply, but you're talking about guys fielding PKMs or SVDs or whatever, and they have the ability to put, hate down on you, and you don't have the ability to put hate down on them. Bottom line is, the M4 is a good weapon in many ways, but let's face it, it's been in service for so long now, it definitely should have been evolved. There's areas in it where it should have been, developed or refined or whatever, and kind of taken to the next level. But like you were talking about, look at the many times there's been stops and starts and money wasted and whatnot in different projects, and there's been hundreds of millions of dollars, and we still have the same gun that we've had essentially for all intents and purposes in Vietnam. So that has really got to change. If you use the same analogy, look at the helicopters you'd have, look at the airplanes you'd have, look at the communication equipment you'd have. If that was the same thing that went on, there was hundreds of millions of dollars spent, and we have essentially the same radio that the guys were using in the Tet Offensive, or the same helo or whatever. That doesn't apply. So you go, wait a minute, why is it okay over here to field these guys? Equipment that's kind of cutting edge or next level, but these guys are essentially carrying the same rifle that they carried, in 1968. So it's a mess. I was involved with a project with my former unit where we needed a variant of an M4 carbine that was shorter, reliable, and more easy to maneuver in confined spaces, which is essentially where the HK416 came from. That's the kind of stuff we need to do, and that gun was fielded in a very short time frame. We had great cooperation with H&K. It went very well, been a huge success. The unit I was involved with is still using it, still widely used, not only in special operations in the United States, but especially overseas. That's the same thing like the Colonel's talking about. Let's get people involved who know what they're talking about. Let's get a direction, let's get a consensus, and let's quit wasting millions of dollars and essentially ending up with nothing, and you're fielding the same gun that you fielded for years.
And what Larry's talking about is the real problem with weapons procurement and acquisition in the United States military. Because too often we have top-level defense industry executives pushing down what they want to sell. And the other thing is that all of a sudden you have the member of the House of Representatives or the senator that says, I want these guys to get this contract because their factory or whatever is in my district, and I want to be able to say jobs. What needs to happen is you have the bottom up. You need to have the experts that have been out there, that have been in that close quarter fight, been in the long fight, and they know exactly what the requirements are and what are necessary. We have to trust them and get this equipment out to our folks on the front lines. But too much politics gets involved, too many folks on the defense industry side, and it is always amazing to me that whenever administration changes over, who ends up getting the key positions in the Pentagon? People that are in that industry, being that those upper corporations. This is the kind of guy that you need to start looking at the replacement for the M4.
Does the caliber exist?
Oh, without a doubt. We were talking offline before. We understand we live in a 5.56 and a 7.62 NATO world, and we get that, but we also understand there is a distinct gap in between where really now, with the amount of time and experience we've got being in combat, there's a gun that you could hand the average soldier that probably somewhere in the 6mm family that would answer the mail more so than a gun, especially like in the desert. When I'm seeing a guy who's 500-600 meters away and I'm shooting a 5.56, and I mean, I can plink at him, and if I hit him, it's great, but I'm essentially shooting him with a .22 long rifle at that distance. I have something now that's going to have a lot better ballistic capability downrange. Yeah, I definitely think the round exists, or it can be tweaked slightly to where it makes sense for that role. Absolutely.
Is there any incentive for people in the firearms industry, manufacturers, to be trying to take the lead on that? Or is it at this point pointless for them to do that based on lack of traction on that issue?
If I were in that position, I would, if I were some of the leading companies in the industry, a Colt or an FN or an HK or whatever, I would hold back for a while. And I'll tell you why. And once again, we were talking about this offline. The 6.8, where is it at? For a while there, it was the biggest thing going. I mean, everybody and their brother. And now I would challenge you to find a 6.8 firearm on display at the SHOT Show. And a lot of manufacturers kind of jumped on that. They thought that thing was going to take off. It was good intent for sure, but really the execution on that round was not where it needed to be. The gun was not where it needed to be. Now, if I were a manufacturer, I would tell them to hold back for a while. Let's just see what happens here, because there's a lot of 6.5 players going on. And there could be one that becomes the ultimate solution that has not even been shown yet. I would hold back off that for a while and let the dust settle before I jumped into that.
We got a question from a local SWAT team leader wanting to know about your thoughts, Larry, on pistol calibers versus rifle calibers for tactical entry uses.
My theory behind that is, what is your environment that you're going to use this thing? If you go in and say, my farthest shot is going to be 30 yards away, by all means, you can use a pistol caliber and you get the job done. However, if you're going to be going in a Walmart or a Costco or somewhere, and then you got some guy and he's literally 70, 80, or even 100 yards down one of the aisles shooting back at you, I wouldn't want to be doing that with a pistol caliber carbine. You need a 5.56, you need a 300 blackout, you need something that's going to be able to put something on him at that distance. So you got to really take a hard look at, how am I realistically going to use this thing? What is a realistic scenario? And that has to always guide the caliber choice.
No, Larry, I know that you're not the biggest proponent of shotguns, but do you think realistically that in our time right now where the AR is king, that shotguns still have a valid role as a home defense weapon?
Possibly from a simplicity point of view. I mean, the thing about a handgun is they hold a lot. There's many on the market. They hold a lot of bullets, all that, but they're far more difficult to shoot than anything else. They require a certain skill level, to be able to apply it, especially under conditions of stress. And there's no more stress than life or death. I mean, if I don't solve this problem, I'm going to die. A lot of people don't have the confidence to be able to pick up that Glock or Smith & Wesson M&P or HK USP or you name it in the middle of the night and bet their life on it. You could argue that a shotgun, especially a caliber that somebody's in that position could use, you're much better off with somebody picking up a 20 gauge or a 28 gauge or whatever the case may be and use it versus a 12 gauge, and it's something they can't really manage. And it's something that they have the ability to use and be able to get shots on target or get hate on target that they need to. That's where I would say a simplicity of use for that particular weapon in that given scenario with somebody we may not have the skill set to use a handgun. That's something that, in my opinion, has limited viability. I'm the person that would tell you, hey, let's go out and get the skill set, or let's get at least the skill set that we need to use a carbine or even a pistol calibered carbine in that scenario versus a shotgun. Because the bottom line is with a shotgun, most people are going to be using pump shotguns of some flavor for that. I mean, that's what you're going to be using. You're betting your life that you're going to be able to solve that problem with whatever you got in that gun. 5 to 8 rounds, and that is it. Because realistically, under conditions of stress, where you have home invaders, to think that I'm going to reload the shotgun and re-engage these guys, you need to get off that.
No, in a military scenario, most of the shotgun's use has been as a breaching tool.
Yep.
On the infantry side and do they? Is it very widely fielded in a military context? It's these days, from a law enforcement perspective, it is significantly dwindling. And did you see much employment of the shotguns for anything other than breaching?
No. Just that, and I would tend to believe that if you're in an environment like the IDF is, where you have these tunnel systems, maybe that's a good tool to have in that type of environment. But no, I don't see it being widely used because it's a different battlefield. Like Larry said, in the desert environment, it's about being able to reach out and touch that guy because you have less and less involvement with the close quarter combat, unless you get into the compounds or some of the smaller villages or what have you. But most of it is about the 200 to 300 yard meter ability to reach out and touch somebody.
Colonel West, as a board member with NRA, can you kind of give us a sense of where things are right now with NRA from obviously you mentioned earlier the Hearing Protection Act and the which is
National
another
Arrest
instrument of people
yeah.
talking about stop using the word silencers and start using the word suppressors.
It's all about lexicon.
Yeah, it is. And what are some other things you're seeing that have caught your interest, or kind of your vision for what you want to see done with NRA?
Well, let me tell you, the most important lesson to have learned from the election of 2016, and I find it so funny. When President Obama once talked about the people that cling to their guns and their religion, those are the people that made the difference in 2016. Well, I think that we wholeheartedly agree with you. We're just saying do it responsibly.
Yeah.
It's just the same as when you go out and drinking. Okay, you should be able to go out and drink responsibly. Or if you're going out and you're drinking irresponsibly, don't get in the car and put the ignition into the vehicle. So if you're going to do open carry, like Larry said, common sense test. I mean, nothing would cause you to lose support than if you're out there carrying, this big monster, weapon, and there are little kids around. Especially if you just had a shooting at a high school in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So as we teach in the military, be aware of your environment. And so be aware of your situation, your circumstances, and so just be smart about it, because this is an incredible ideological battle that we're against. And we have to win this war, or else you're not going to have a Second Amendment, period. And that's why I was saying 5-4. The Heller decision was 5-4 for us to have a Second Amendment in the United States of America. And that's why the Supreme Court is so important. And that's why one of the key things that we have to do is stay engaged, stay on top of our legislators, stay on top of the people in your state, and your local, legislators as well.
If you are concealed carrying and take a jacket off in a restaurant or something, if that's the one thing the positive that I see, that it's not going to, it allows you for somebody to see that firearm and not make you a criminal.
I mean, one of the things that we ought to look at is this whole thing about campus carry. And we need to put young women out there on these campuses as the face of that. Because so often folks don't realize, if you're a young lady, and my two daughters, you're a young lady and you're studying late, and you're walking back to the parking lot, and many of these, campuses, they're not sealed off. Anyone can get onto these campuses, and they're sitting around, and they're praying, they're waiting. That's how we start to win this thing over. So I want our daughters to be able to feel safe on an environment where chances are they're not safe. Because again, these campus police, a lot of times they're not armed. They just report to the local law enforcement agency. And what happens in the meantime when your daughter or, someone is being assaulted?
Well, I think what you're saying is you're framing a way to communicate the Second Amendment and the right that comes with that is, A, it's very tenuous, and B, we need to tell the stories of the people whose by very existence explains it as a civil rights issue. Like you mentioned Chicago, kind of take us through the kind of your take on you mentioned earlier that you felt people, particularly African American people in that community, are being held hostage because they are subject to a criminal element that is, perhaps the police are poorly funded, there's maybe training issues, perception issues, whatever, but they're being strangled by a legislative body that is wanting to draw a circle around Chicago and say you have no ability to protect yourself here. What has been your experience kind of as a leader on those types of issues, like with what Chicago's facing?
Well, the thing is, they're not showing the face of those people that are suffering and being held hostage. When you have, little kids that are being gunned down in their houses because of stray bullets and things of this nature. So again, I would say the people in Chicago, or us as the gun owners of America, need to be challenging someone like a Rahm Emanuel, challenging, a place like the city of Seattle, to say that the number one thing that you're supposed to be doing is providing safety and security for your citizens. And if you can't be there with law enforcement 24/7, they need to be able to protect themselves. And again, that's how you turn this argument. History will tell you something very simple, and we can go back and research this. It was the Democrat Party that did not want blacks to have, weapons after they had been, free from slavery. And of course, they became the prey of the Ku Klux Klan. But when you had an organization like the NRA and others, they were the ones that came and said, this is a right that they have, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, so that they can have the equal protection under the law. Of course, we've taken that amendment and we perverted it for whatever use that people want to have. So this is about those folks that are the most vulnerable in all of these inner cities across the United States of America, where sadly we have allowed the criminal elements to go in and take over. You have certain places. I mean, Detroit's coming back, but Detroit was a combat zone.
Oh, big time.
I mean, I wouldn't want to go on patrol in Detroit. And so again, we need to make sure that we're putting those faces out there, and we need to be telling their stories. And I think that would be a great platform that SHOT Show and all of these other gun industry, firearm industry conventions, they need to highlight that and to say that this is not just about folks like Alan West going out there and buying something that he can go blow rounds on. This is about protection for people.
Well, and I think that a lot of times when we have these large trade shows and conventions, you'll hear a hell of a lot more conversation and complaining about Benghazi than you do about what's going on in Chicago. And I think my takeaway from what you're saying, which I think is really important, is we have to tell these stories. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to share them in order to be able to tell them. Mm-hmm.
Thousands of people have been killed in Chicago. There have been more people killed in Chicago than what we've had in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 2-3 years. How do you explain that?
And the people living in those cities have less civil rights than someone in Dallas or someone in Atlanta.
They're subjects, they're not citizens.
That's right.
We've had a question from somebody who wanted to know about your thoughts, Colonel West, and Larry as well, and Don also, on the recent California legislation on the guns and ammo laws that have been passed there.
Why is anyone living in California?
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know what. And sadly, there are people leaving California and coming to Texas, and they're bringing their same stupidity. But think about this. They are restricting Americans from being able to defend themselves. Think about what happened in San Bernardino, okay? San Bernardino, as the president at the time said, that was not a gun control issue. That was an Islamic jihadist attack. And those folks there were unarmed. They were not able to protect themselves. And so when you have this place that has become a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants that are, allowing Americans to be targets, look at Kate Steinle. The case with Kate Steinle should absolutely incense every American. Now, the fact that this individual was acquitted of murder and manslaughter, if Larry and I go out and we fire a firearm here on the Strip, we're going to be convicted of something, right? Okay? But this person was acquitted, and then furthermore, he is free now because even the felonious gun charge, they said time served while he was waiting for the sentence. So I don't know why, it's a beautiful state, I don't know why people are living in California, because the mentality, the ideology is everything against our constitutional freedoms and liberties.
An interesting point. Don, talk about some of the claims. You've had claims that you've managed. There's a perception that there's no concealed carry that goes on in legal concealed carry that goes on in California, but it's in flux right now, and that's why their legislature is trying to pass, statewide legislation to rein in, sheriffs who are issuing permits in more conservative areas. And so you may have a sheriff who's conservative, even in somewhere like San Diego County, and what was the one, we had a recent one that we got dismissed. It was outside, was it San Diego County?
I think that was San Diego County.
Yeah, talk about
That's
your
right.
experiences, Don, with prosecutors. And you can be in a conservative area, but if your prosecutor is someone who is anti-gun or has their own political agenda to aspire to higher office, you've seen that quite a bit in your career, haven't you?
Well, I've certainly seen cases that I thought were politically motivated, where the individual had some other agenda, whether it was for self-promotion or they had a personal attitude against something. And firearms, I think, fills that category for a lot of prosecutors. They're just anti-gun. And there are certainly some that have a much more reasonable approach to it, but it's subject sometimes to the individual biases and views of that person that happens to draw the case out of the file. I don't know that I can talk specifically to California, except to say what I've seen in a couple of the cases there is exactly that. It's sort of the luck of the draw, which prosecutor gets assigned to the case, not so much which judge. They don't control the charge and rarely control the outcome, actually. But I know that it varies wildly from county to county, and there's almost no way to predict whether you will get charged or not, except you should assume you would be, because that's been my experience, is that everybody gets charged for firearms offense if one is possible.
Yeah, we've seen a lot where charge first, we'll sort it out later. Same thing with, the claims that we've had a lot of is the idea of brandishing. And hopefully one of the things that Larry and his team at the Firearms Trainers Association gets going is going to be, increasing the awareness of the existence of opportunities to train. And I think we in the industry are going to have to ultimately reach out to groups that previously have not been thought of as potential advocates of gun ownership. African Americans, Hispanics, because we're within the next 40 years of being a majority-minority country. And we need to, so I'm curious, Colonel West, of the things that the NRA may be already involved in and reaching out to communities that have historically not been perceived as a demographic of the gun industry.
No, you're absolutely right. I sit on the outreach committee for the NRA, and as you know, they'll be coming to Dallas, and that's one of the things I've been tasked to do because I live there, is to reach out to the non-traditional leaders out there in the Dallas community and bring them in and break down those barriers. And one of the things that I recommended is that on one of these days, we have a junior ROTC day. And we let these junior ROTC cadets come in because most of these junior ROTC cadets are in the lower privileged high school areas. And, lots of them come from the homes that don't have the mothers and the fathers. And what a great thing to bring them in and break down this perception of the gun industry and break down the perception that only gang members are carrying guns. I mean, you can be responsible and carry a gun. So that's an incredible outreach thing that we have to do. I don't know if y'all saw the commercial advertisement, Freedom Safest Place, but one of the most successful ones was the black female elderly woman that lived in Wilmington, Delaware. True story. They were going to put her out of the Section 8 housing, the housing project she lived in. She wanted to be able to protect herself against the gangbangers that were in there terrorizing them. And that case was taken up and it was dismissed. That's what we have to do. I mean, again, I am so glad. I want to see more women in your firearm instructor association, more minorities in the firearm instructor association. This is a right that everyone has to be able to exercise. And we have to change that perception. We have to change that image, have to change that identity. And so we're working hard to do that. But I got to tell you, every single one of us that own guns, we have to work hard ourselves to be able to do that.
That's a great point. We got a question, Larry, about the official rollout date, the go-live date on the Firearms Trainers Association of America. And I believe the date that has been determined at this point the target date is March 15th.
Yeah, like middle of March is when we're looking to kick it off. That's the plan right now.
And some of the benefits to the members are going to be professional liability insurance that will be, they'll get a certificate of insurance anytime they need it, so they can provide proof of insurance for ranges when they're doing training, as well as some support for curriculum, even a curriculum process. They can use the logo and identify themselves as being a member, which from a marketing standpoint will be good and show that there's somebody who's at least gone through a vetting process. And the NRA is key to that, because the NRA kind of has the threshold of the NRA basic instructor, and there are tens of thousands of them all over the United States, but they've never had an independent, standalone entity that can provide them an insurance and as well as protect them elsewhere. So I think the hashtag that Jeff Gonzalez was talking with you about was protecting the profession.
Yep.
And one of the things that the FTA is trying to do is professionalize the profession of firearms trainers, and that's something I think all of us can do. Even though we're not a firearms trainer, we can professionalize ourselves as a firearms owner and enthusiast, and get to the point where we are all individual ambassadors
Absolutely.
for a right
That's-
that is
that's
subject
what was Barry to say.
to being taken away. And so we're kind of approaching kind of the end of our program. At the end of the hour, I wanted to kind of do a little roundtable and kind of talk about something particularly of interest to you. Maybe it's something you saw it shot. Maybe it's a conversation you've had with somebody, Colonel West, or some legislative things that are on the horizon. Anything kind of special note to you as we kind of wrap up?
Well,
Larry, we'll start with you and work our way around.
You just hit on it. Everybody has to be their own individual ambassador, and you have to be the person that when you have a neighbor or somebody else you work with, and case in point, I just had my neighbor a while ago, went over and met. Turns out that a lawyer, he's a lawyer, my neighbor is, and he has a group of lawyers that work under him. He's a big fan of mine, so he wanted to, come over and talk 1911s, has some of my books and everything. Well, he has his fiance there. And we get talking and everything, and they had just moved down from up north. They were down in the North Carolina area, and I go, do you like to shoot? And she says, no, not really. I just, I don't have anything against guns, but whatever. And I go, well, do you understand what the Second Amendment's about? And she's like, well, no. And I go, well, maybe nobody's ever explained it to you, but this is what it's about. And that was a big eye-opener to her. She's like, oh, whoa. And I go, you need to understand where this came from and why we have it. It's not about people going out and shooting deer and nothing like that. You got to understand where this comes from. So I like to think that maybe she kind of had a little bit of a, wow, I never thought about it at that point of view, or, from that perspective. So you got to be that ambassador, and you got to be thinking about, how am I representing myself? How am I coming across? When I run into somebody, I don't immediately dismiss them because they don't like guns or whatever. You need to take that chance, take that opportunity to engage them, because it's the little things over time that add up. I mean, think about how we all got started in guns. You know what I mean?
Someone took you hunting,
Yeah.
or somebody took you shooting, and for you, Larry, I've heard you tell it before, but I think it's very consistent with lots of people's experience. What was the thing that hooked you on being a firearms enthusiast?
Oh, my dad. My dad gave me a 22. He's a World War II vet, and he gave me a 22, and that was it. I mean, it was game over. Little did I know, but it's just literally like planting a seedling, and then it grows from there. So you gotta remember, you're gonna run into people, and then somewhere down the line, you're gonna, oh yeah, I remember seeing you. You see the guy at SHOT Show, and he's working at a gun company, or he's an instructor and everything. I've already seen that with students in my classes and stuff. A guy starts out, just bought a gun. Maybe he had people who've had home invasions. Fortunately, everything turned out, but they're like, I'm going to learn to protect myself. And one thing leads to another. Now I see the guy in my classes. He's been in countless classes. I'll see him at SHOT Show. Now he's a great shooter. You got to take that opportunity to be an ambassador for the Second Amendment and for gun owners. All of us do.
Well, and it's important also, I think, to, it's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, is we shout slogans at one another, but you can't win an argument if you don't understand the argument that's being made that opposes you. And Don and I, as professional arguers, you have to understand where the other person is coming from. You may think they're wrong and you want to shout at them, but what you really have to do is, first of all, listen to them. They will give you all the ammunition you need to have a rational conversation with them and identify the things that they're saying that are incorrect. But the very first step is we have to listen to one another. And so I think that's a really key observation that you made, and you obviously effectively communicated with your neighbors. So that's great. Larry, also tell us where people can find you on the social media, all that.
VickersTactical.com. You know, obviously a YouTube channel. I got Facebook. I got Instagram. VickersTactical.com.
And also you have VickersGuide.com,
Yeah.
and your co-author James is with us tonight as well. And so congratulations on your beautiful books, and those are wonderful.
Thank
so
you
we're
very
very welcome to James, and
Thank my dad. Tribute to my dad, because it all started with him.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. And Colonel West, kind of your final thoughts and observations, things you've seen, just however you want to kind of wrap up.
Well, it dovetails again off of what Larry said. We have to be ambassadors. We have to be positive ambassadors. We have to change the perception, and we have to change the message that is out there about this incredible thing that our founding fathers gave us, which is the Second Amendment, because they put it there because then you will always have your First Amendment. If the Second Amendment is gone, all you have to do is look down at Venezuela and see what is happening there, where you're not going to be able to protest against your government. You'll just, as I said, just be a subject. And I think the other thing that is so important is we have to continue to stress that the Second Amendment is your true civil right. And without that, you're not going to be able to provide the protection for yourself and for your loved ones. And that's just the antithesis of what the American dream is all about. And as gun owners, we have to be responsible. And so I think that all ties together, because I want to make sure that 20 years from now, there's still a SHOT Show. But there are some people out there that don't want to see that happen.
I would be remiss if I did not ask you, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time, are you done with seeking public office? Would you ever run again?
You know, the thing that I tell folks, you don't need a title to serve this country. If God means for me to return back up to Capitol Hill, I will. But I will continue to fight, because the oath that we took to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same, does not change just because you take off a uniform. You continue to fight for this country if you truly believe in that oath.
Well, thank you very much. It's great, great point, and we appreciate that. And thank you for your leadership role with NRA as well.
My pleasure.
And all your efforts, both of you, to go to that. Don, what is your kind of final takeaway point? You've been spending a few days out here at SHOT Show.
I have. And
other than you won't play craps with me ever again. Other than that,
I'm saving that for Stan. Stan, I've learned that everyone I talk to knows something that I don't. And that has been such a pleasure to learn and learn and learn. But you can't learn unless you listen. And there's lots of room for discussion rather than argument. And I commend both of you for your insight and comments tonight. It's been something that has been an important issue, but one that I've never been able to articulate so clearly. And thank you.
Thank you.
well, and kind of final sign off. All three of these gentlemen possess tremendous expertise and are true subject matter experts. And one thing, people who are elected to office we need to demand that our elected officials are not only elected officials, but they're leaders. And we need to put people's ideas into play. And one of the great things I love about these three gentlemen they have ideas. And these are the ideas that we need to get behind and share the stories, take somebody to the range, let that light bulb go off in the head of somebody, just like it did for Larry when he was a child, and make sure the responsibility is manyfold. Get legal heat, sign up for ccwsafe.com, get training, and make yourself the responsible gun owner that these three subject matter experts want all of us to be. So thank you very much for coming here tonight and all the great questions and conversation. We appreciate it very much. And so once again, finally, Battlefield Vegas, wonderful hosts, and we appreciate it. Come check out this facility if you're ever in Las Vegas. It's almost like a museum that you get to go play around in. So, signing off from SHOT Show 2018, thank you all very much.
Thank you.